It was a golden afternoon in Austin, Texas, the kind that made the streets glow and the sidewalks feel warm beneath your feet. Naomi Carter, a 68-year-old woman with soft curls of silver hair and a calm, dignified air, stepped out of her favorite local bookstore. Tucked under her arm was a slim brown bag filled with 3 books, a biography of Thurgood Marshall, a poetry collection, and a novel she planned to give her granddaughter. Naomi walked slowly toward her car, a silver sedan parked just across the street. She hummed softly to herself, an old jazz tune, as she opened the trunk and gently placed the bag inside. She adjusted her glasses and took a moment to enjoy the quiet hum of the city. But that quiet was suddenly interrupted. A police cruiser pulled up, tires crunching on gravel. 2 officers stepped out. One of them, young and assertive, called out, "Ma'am, could you step away from the vehicle, please?" Naomi turned puzzled but calm. "Is something wrong, officer?" The younger one, Officer Greg Mason, looked her over with narrowed eyes. "We received a report of a theft at the electronics store down the block. The suspect matches your description, black, late 60s, wearing a blue jacket." Naomi raised an eyebrow, her voice steady. "I haven't been near any electronics store. I've just come from the bookstore over there. Would you like to see my receipt?" She offered the slip of paper with both hands. Officer Mason barely glanced at it before nodding to his partner. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to place your hands behind your back." Naomi's eyes widened. "Excuse me, you're being detained for questioning. Cooperate, please." Before she could say more, Officer Mason had already reached for her wrists. The cold snap of the handcuffs echoed louder than the city sounds around them. A small crowd began to form, curious shoppers and passers-by, watching in silence, some pulling out their phones to record. Naomi stood still, breathing slowly, refusing to lower her gaze. As she was led toward the police car, she spoke, not shouting, but clearly enough for those nearby to hear. "I believe you've made a mistake, and I intend to prove it." And with that, the car door shut. The sun still shone over Austin, but the air had changed. Something had shifted, and it was only the beginning. The ride to the station was silent. Naomi Carter sat in the back of the patrol car, her hands still cuffed behind her, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the city passing by. She didn't speak, not out of fear, but because she knew that sometimes silence carried more weight than words. At the precinct, the officers led her through a side entrance. She walked with quiet dignity, as if she belonged in that building, not as a detainee, but as someone who understood the law better than most. Officer Mason guided her into a small, fluorescent-lit room with a table and 2 chairs. He sat across from her, flipping open a notebook, still unaware of who he was dealing with. "State your name," he said curtly. Naomi looked at him calmly. "Naomi Carter." He didn't flinch, didn't recognize it, just scribbled the name down and continued. "What were you doing in that parking lot today?" "Buying books," she answered plainly, gesturing slightly with her cuffed hands. 3 of them. "I have the receipt and the store's cameras will confirm it." He ignored the comment and pressed on. "Have you been to the Tech Plus store on 7th Street today?" "I don't even know what that is," Naomi replied, her tone still controlled. "You stopped me without verifying anything but my jacket and the color of my skin." Mason paused. That remark seemed to irritate him. "Look, ma'am, we're just following a process here. We got a description, and you matched it." Naomi leaned forward slightly. "What exactly did I match, Officer Mason?" "My age, my complexion, my coat. Is that how your department handles evidence?" Before he could respond, the door opened. A female officer stepped in, holding a phone. She looked serious, tense. "Greg," she said, her voice low, "we've got the actual suspect in custody. Teenage female blue windbreaker caught on camera stealing headphones and tablets from Tech Plus. We found the stolen goods in her bag." Silence fell. The younger officer blinked. "Wait, what?" The woman handed him the phone. On the screen was a still from the store's security footage. The suspect was clearly much younger, different build, and most importantly, not Naomi. Mason stared and his shoulders dropped as the weight of the mistake landed all at once. Naomi looked at him expressionless. Across the station, another officer called out, "Hey, this is the woman from that video online, the one who got arrested in the bookstore parking lot." The clip of Naomi's arrest had already begun to go viral. The footage, her composure, the unjustified handcuffing was striking a nerve online. Comments flooded in demanding accountability. Inside the station, Officer Mason stood frozen. But Naomi, she remained calm. "Take the cuffs off," she said simply. And he did, but the damage had already been done. The keys clinked against the metal cuffs with a faint click, and for the first time in nearly an hour, Naomi Carter rolled her wrists freely. The skin around them bore light red marks, faint but undeniable. Marks of assumption. marks of haste. Officer Mason didn't meet her eyes. His voice, once confident and curt, was now low and uneven. "You're free to go, Ms. Carter," he said. It was a case of mistaken identity. Naomi stood slowly. Her posture was perfect, her silence deliberate. She looked him square in the face. "You detained me without checking any facts. You humiliated me in public. You handcuffed a grandmother in a bookstore parking lot." Mason shifted uncomfortably. "We were following procedure." "Procedure?" She repeated, her voice calm but cutting. "When procedure begins and ends with bias, it stops being justice." The room was quiet. No apologies, no formal statement, just the lingering tension of a mistake neither of them could undo. Naomi picked up her handbag, still lying on the table untouched, and walked toward the exit. Outside, a different scene had begun to unfold. A crowd had gathered. Some held phones, others held signs. Reporters from local outlets were already there adjusting microphones and camera angles. The video of Naomi's wrongful arrest had spread like wildfire, shared thousands of times within the hour. Her name had started to trend. As the door opened and Naomi stepped out into the late afternoon sun, a ripple went through the crowd. Some people clapped. Others called out, "We're with you, ma'am. Justice for Naomi." She didn't raise her hand, didn't speak. She simply walked down the station steps with the same poise she'd carried all along, quiet but unmistakable. A young journalist rushed forward. "Ms. Carter, do you have a statement for the press?" Naomi paused. Then, without turning fully, she said softly, "You'll hear from me soon, but not today." And with that, she disappeared into a waiting car. In her silence, there was power. In her composure, a challenge. This was no longer just a mistake. It was a reckoning. The sun had long set over Austin by the time Naomi Carter arrived home. Her modest brick house sat quietly at the edge of a tree-lined street, porch light glowing like a steady heartbeat. Inside, Naomi placed her handbag on the kitchen table. She moved slowly, not from age, but from thought. The air was still, heavy with what had happened, but heavier with what needed to come next. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat down at her desk, surrounded by shelves of legal texts, framed diplomas, and family photos. Her law degree hung above her computer, Harvard Law class of '83. A reminder not just of who she was, but of how far she had come. She opened her laptop. The inbox was overflowing, hundreds of emails. Strangers, former students, activists, all reaching out in disbelief, outraged support. Some had recognized her instantly from the video. Others were just learning who she was. "You've always taught us to believe in the system. What happens when it fails you? Ms. Carter, please speak up. We need your voice." Naomi leaned back, the weight of the moment settling on her shoulders. But there was no bitterness in her eyes, only clarity. She clicked open a blank document and began to write. "To the Office of the Attorney General. In light of the events of October 12th, I am formally requesting an internal review into the procedures followed by the Austin Police Department concerning stop and search protocols and identification verification." She typed late into the night, outlining specific reforms: mandatory anti-bias training for new and existing officers, proper verification of suspect descriptions before detainment, community oversight in civilian complaints. This wasn't just a letter, it was a blueprint for change. Later, she reviewed the footage of her own arrest frame by frame. She didn't flinch. She took notes, not as a victim, but as a prosecutor, a strategist. On her desk, she placed her courtroom badge beside her reading glasses. Tomorrow, she wouldn't just be Ms. Naomi Carter. She'd be the lead witness. The quiet figure in handcuffs had become the storm. The courthouse was unusually quiet that morning. Reporters waited on the steps. Security was doubled. Inside the gallery, filled with spectators, students, community leaders, retired, judges, curious citizens. Word had spread fast. Naomi Carter, the woman wrongfully arrested, would testify. But few knew the full truth, that Naomi wasn't just another name in the headlines. She was a legal mind, a voice long respected behind closed doors. And now she was stepping into the spotlight. In courtroom 4B, Officer Greg Mason sat stiffly beside his attorney, hands clasped, eyes avoiding the bench. He looked less like the assertive young cop from the week before and more like someone waiting for the ground to shift beneath him. When the bailiff called her name, the room hushed. Naomi Carter entered wearing a tailored navy suit, modest heels, and a gold pin on her lapel. Justice is earned. She carried a folder in one hand and an unshakable calm in the other. She took the stand. The prosecutor began. "Ms. Carter, can you walk us through the events of October 12th? She nodded. Her voice was steady, measured, but every word landed like a weight on the courtroom floor. I exited a bookstore around 3:40 p.m. I had purchased 3 books. I was placing them in my trunk when I was approached by 2 officers. Despite offering my receipt and stating my whereabouts, I was handcuffed, publicly, without verification, without cause. Gasps from the audience. Officer Mason looked down. I was not questioned. I was not heard. I was judged first by what I wore, then by how I looked. The defense lawyer objected, calling it an emotional argument. The judge overruled. She's stating facts. Naomi continued, I am a mother, a grandmother, a legal professional with over 40 years in this system. But in that moment, none of that mattered, because bias doesn't stop to ask for a resume. Then she paused, looked directly at the officer. And yet I don't stand here today to humiliate Officer Mason. I'm not seeking punishment. I'm seeking something deeper. I want accountability. I want reform. I want officers to understand that their badge carries not just power, but responsibility. At that moment, the court clerk cued the video, the footage of Naomi being handcuffed. The room watched in silence, Naomi standing tall, offering her receipt, the officers ignoring her, then the metallic click of cuffs. It was undeniable. When the lights came back on, no one could meet her gaze. Naomi closed her folder and finished with one simple line. Justice isn't just about who breaks the law. It's about who upholds it and how. She stepped down from the stand, and the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of reckoning. The courtroom slowly emptied, but the story was far from over. A few hours after Naomi Carter stepped down from the witness stand, a press conference was announced, unexpected, hastily arranged. In front of City Hall, a podium stood surrounded by cameras, journalists, and local officials. Word had spread Officer Greg Mason would speak. He approached the microphone wearing his uniform, but the crisp edges of his badge couldn't hide the weight on his shoulders. His voice trembled slightly as he began. I made a mistake, not just in how I acted, but in how I saw. I profiled someone without cause. I let bias guide my decisions instead of facts, and I hurt someone who deserved nothing but respect. He paused, struggling to steady his breath. To Ms. Naomi Carter, my actions were wrong, deeply, and I'm sorry. The crowd murmured. Some nodded, others folded their arms. The apology was real, but would it be enough? From the side, Naomi stepped forward. She hadn't planned to attend, but something about this moment felt necessary. She didn't take the mic. Instead, she looked him in the eye, her voice soft but clear enough for everyone to hear. I accept your apology, Officer Mason, but understand this: forgiveness doesn't erase responsibility. Real change begins after the apology, with action, education, and a willingness to listen. A quiet fell over the square, not uncomfortable but reflective. The next morning, Naomi's words were everywhere. News outlets quoted her. Social media turned her speech into reels, captions, and calls to action. Students shared it. Professors discussed it. Young Black girls watched it and saw something powerful, not anger, but strength. And something else changed too. Officer Mason requested a transfer, not out of shame, but out of purpose. He joined the department's community outreach team, where he now visits schools and speaks to new recruits about unconscious bias, using his own story as a warning and a lesson. Naomi, she didn't slow down. Invitations poured in from universities, law schools, justice reform panels. But she accepted only a few. The rest of the time, she spent mentoring, writing policy recommendations, and walking through neighborhoods that once whispered injustice, now beginning to speak truth. Change doesn't happen overnight. But weeks after the trial, Austin began to feel different. The police department, once silent in the face of public criticism, took a bold step. In a citywide address, the chief of police announced a reform initiative shaped in part by Naomi Carter's recommendations: mandatory anti-bias training for every officer, revised detainment protocols that require evidence-based verification before arrest, and for the first time ever, a civilian-led oversight board to review complaints of racial profiling. Naomi didn't seek the spotlight, but the spotlight found her. Her courtroom testimony became part of a documentary on justice reform. Her speech outside City Hall was replayed on talk shows in classrooms and even at police academies. And Officer Mason, he kept his word. He traded patrol for community service, visiting high schools and training workshops. He never spoke as a victim of criticism, but as a participant in change. I learned more from my mistake than I ever did from training, he admitted during a session with cadets. The day I arrested Ms. Carter, I wasn't just arresting a woman, I was arresting everything I didn't understand. Meanwhile, Naomi found herself standing in front of a new kind of audience, young people. In a packed auditorium at a local university, she closed her lecture with a simple message: justice is not a destination, it's a daily decision. In courtrooms, yes, but also in classrooms, at coffee shops, in how we treat strangers on the street. That clip shared by a high school senior on TikTok went viral again. It sparked a nationwide conversation inspiring student-led campaigns, discussion groups, and essays titled What Naomi Taught Us. One letter, handwritten in blue ink, arrived in her mailbox weeks later. Dear Ms. Carter, I'm 16. I didn't know much about law before you. Now I think I want to study it not to fight people, but to protect them. Thank you for being brave. My 11th grade. Naomi read it twice, then placed it in a box labeled Letters That Matter, because that too was justice. The cicadas hummed softly in the trees as the sun dipped low behind the rooftops of East Austin. On a quiet porch lined with potted herbs and a worn rocking chair, Naomi Carter sat wrapped in a light shawl, a cup of chamomile tea warming in her hands. She rocked gently, her eyes scanning the fading sky's soft blues, folding into deep purples. It was a familiar rhythm, one she'd returned to after all the noise, the headlines, the cameras. Here she didn't need a podium. Here she could just be Naomi. On the small side table beside her rested two things: a letter from a student named Maya, and an old leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with thoughts, moments, and unfinished speeches. She opened it, scribbled one last line on a blank page. Justice is not the end of a fight. It's the beginning of a better way to live with one another. Inside the house, her granddaughter's laughter echoed faintly from the kitchen. The scent of warm cornbread drifted through the air. Life, with all its pain and grace, was still unfolding. Naomi took a long sip of tea and looked out across the yard, not seeing the fence or the sidewalk, but something further. Something better. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become a mirror for every person wrongly accused, for every officer learning to see deeper than assumptions, for every young voice rising to demand better. And though the journey ahead was long, Naomi believed, as always, in steps. One honest step, one necessary truth, one courageous voice at a time. Final words spoken in narration. The world won't change all at once, but it will change step by step, voice by voice, truth by truth. And when it does, it will be because someone chose to stand up when it mattered most. Fade to black. Soft piano plays. The screen reads, inspired by real stories. Dedicated to every voice that refused to stay silent.